Summer Sweetheart, Chapter 13. Alisa was stunned for a moment before realizing that the owner of this voice was Luther. Why haven't you left? What responded back to her was the sound of the phone being hung up. She looked at the phone that was hung up and squatted down anxiously holding her head. Why should everyone embarrass her? Rachel and Colin gave birth to her, but they never loved her. She was forced to marry into Adam's house, and Carl hated to see her. She didn't want to cause trouble, but Luther insisted on pestering her. However, if Luther was ignored, would he really tell Carl that she seduced him? Thinking of this possibility, Alisa took another deep breath and stood up. Although she threatened Rachel and Isabel with such things, if Luther was really nonsense, the Adams family would definitely sacrifice her to preserve the Adams family reputation, whether it was true or not. Alisa did not go to pack those dishes mentioned by Luther, but went to the vegetable market to buy ingredients. When she opened the door and went in, she saw Luther's tall body nestled in her small single sofa. The handsome man tilted his head and leaned on the back of the sofa with his long legs folded together, maintaining a free and a comfortable posture. If it weren't for his paleness and his calm and quiet look, it was almost impossible to tell that he was one who had just received a gunshot wound. Even so, he still looked at odds with her cramped little single room. After all, he was a young master who was spoiled and grown up in a wealthy family. Even if his character is a little bit worse, his grace and elegance cannot be hidden. She put the food in her hand aside, bent over to change shoes. The bitter breath suddenly approached. She raised her head and sharply saw the man was still leaning on the sofa before. She did not know when he had already walked to her and was looking down at the vegetables she brought back. Carl saw the food she brought, raised his eyebrows and looked at her. "This is the food you packed." Alisa had changed her shoes, turned around to take the vegetables and said in a light tone, "Packing cooked vegetable is too expensive. I am poor." Carl took a look at her clothes and they looked really cheap and old. His newlywed wife is really very shabby. Alisa didn't care about his thoughts and took the vegetable to the small kitchen partitioned off. An hour later, Alisa prepared the dishes and brought them out. Carl put down the phone and glanced at her. His eyes fell on the dishes she cooked. The taste of the dishes is very good and it looks very light, which is very suitable for the patient's diet. Alisa put the meal in front of him and left him alone. With a casual glance, she found that Luther suddenly sank after eating a few bites of food, and his expression looked a little gloomy. Alisa's heartbeats increased. What's wrong? Can she offend this young master by cooking? Carl put down his chopsticks with a gloomy expression, got up and walked out. The pace is steady, with no weakness at all. Alisa's action of picking up the rice slightly paused, but still did not follow him outside. Carl took a cigarette in his pocket irritably, and it took a long time to remember that there was no smoke. The familiar taste just reminded him of his mother. Although the gentle and elegant mother was born famous, she is gentle and virtuous and liked to cook and make soup. But in the end, he thought of the damp and dirty basement, clenched his fist, and slammed his fist against the wall with a loud bang. Even Alisa, who was eating in the room, heard this voice. She hesitated, still not at ease, put down the dishes and opened the door and went out. "What's wrong? What happened?" Chapter 14. Alisa glanced at Luther, who was full of gloom and sadness, and caught a glimpse of back of his bloody hand staring at surprise. "You..." She didn't put any strange things in her meal, so why make him unable to figure out how to run away from the disabled? Carl ignored her and raising his foot to leave when his cell phone rang. He glanced at the unfamiliar number on the phone and hung up. At this time, he looked at Alisa. "Go in." His voice was cold and depressed with a certain gloomy mood. Alisa was very sensitive to feel that Luther at the moment was a bit scary. She silently moved back into the room, holding the half-closed door in one hand and hesitating whether to shut the man directly outside. Carl didn't pay attention to her entangled because his mobile phone rang again. This time, instead of an unfamiliar number on the screen, the word Smith was displayed. He did not hesitate to answer the phone, nor did he shy away from Eliza's presence, and said directly, "What is he looking for?" At night, on the other hand, he said concisely, "Let you take his daughter-in-law home from dinner tonight." Carl sneered. "You can leave his calls in the future." Smith agreed. "Well, he doesn't pay me anyway." Hanging up the phone, Carl looked up and saw Eliza standing at the door, still hesitating. "Eavesdrop on my phone call." Eliza shook her head quickly. "No. She feels that Luther at this time is best not to mess with. Why don't you go in?" After Carl finished speaking, he took a step forward, looking at her condescendingly with an ambiguous voice. "Or you figured it out? Are you willing to give up my cousin and follow me?" Hearing this, Eliza turned around and closed the door without hesitation. Carl looked at the door being closed mercilessly without the slightest fluctuation in his eyes. He will stay here these 2 days, but he wants to find out if the person he chased that day will be here. Since that person is not here, he no longer has the need to stay with Eliza. This newlywed wife is a little clever and kind-hearted. At present, he will not hinder what he is going to do, so he intends to leave her alone for now. At the entrance of the alley, Carl saw the time. He was waiting there at a glance. When Smith saw Carl, he strode over with an imperceptible worry on his resolute face. "Boss, how is your health?" Carl waved his hand and pushed away from the hand that was coming to support Smith. "It's okay." Smith opened the car door for him. He got into the car and leaned his head on the back of the chair. His voice was indifferent and he couldn't hear his emotions. "Smith, has he been calling you these 2 days?" Smith knew who Carl was talking about, nodded and replied, "Mr. Adams said you blocked his phone number and he changed his number to call you, but you didn't answer. He had to call me." "Yeah, it's not the first time anyway. Just before you came, Mr. Adam called and said that if you don't take your wife back for dinner, he will call the wife himself. His good father wants to call the woman Eliza and ask her to eat at Adam's house." Smith waited for a long time before hearing Carl's indifferent voice. "Let him." After Eliza went back to the room after eating and was about to wash the dishes, she heard the phone ringing. It was a strange number. It rang for a while and didn't hang up. It shouldn't be a harassing call. "Hello, my name is Eliza. I'm Carl's father, Trevor Adams.